We'll get started here in just a few moments. We'll give a chance for the stream to take hold. Looks like we're live now. Okay, that's good. Time to go. But like I said a moment ago, we'll wait a few moments. It's kind of an early live stream and on a Saturday, although at times we do live streams on Saturdays and Sundays. But I wanted to do an earlier live stream than usual because a lot of people around the world in other time zones, whenever I do a later afternoon live stream, they can't join. And so I try to switch it around so I can get as many people an opportunity to be a part of the show as I can, with consideration, of course, to my own schedule. But this is a very important show. Obviously, most of them are, but in this case, we're discussing something that, if you're talking to Jehovah's Witnesses associated with the Watchtower Society, you have to understand. You have to understand why they believe 1914 is so important, and why, if we use the Bible only, there's just no evidence. Right? There's interpretations. We're going to get to some of them. Watchtower Society interprets the 7 times of Daniel chapter 4 in association with completely different books of the Bible that don't talk about these same things and that apply a day for a year for the other books' specific issues unrelated to Daniel. So the Watchtower Society takes the 7 times of Daniel, applies a day for a year, and comes up with 2,520 years. When, apart from this non-Daniel use of a day for a year, in 2 other books of the Bible, I believe, I think it's just 2 times that happens, they apply that 2,520 years to the 7 times of Daniel, which contextually couldn't possibly involve 2,520 years for the king of Babylon, the only subject mentioned in regards to those 7 times in Daniel 4. But the Watchtower Society and its supporters will interpret those 7 times according to other books' use of a day for a year, and then they will apply it to a whole different subject. Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, who was removed by the Babylonians. And prior to that was really a vassal for them. But nonetheless, obviously there were still issues, and so he was removed. But Daniel chapter 4 doesn't say anything about a day for a year, doesn't say anything about a Judean king, doesn't say anything about anything other than Nebuchadnezzar. Again, though, right? Watchtower Society will say, well, we think there's a larger fulfillment here. Yeah, and in other parts of Daniel, it talks about different things, right? Like the Messiah the leader appearing. It talks about the Son of Man, right? Receiving authority and kingdom from the Ancient of Days. It talks about the end times, right? Daniel chapter 12 with Michael standing up, appears to be involved with the resurrection, right? The post-1,000-year resurrection where everybody is brought up and judged before God. So there's a lot going on in Daniel, and we're going to get to it. But I want to make it very clear at the outset that the Watchtower's understanding of 1914, these 2,520 years that they associate with the Gentile times of Luke, they interpret those 7 times of Daniel 4 that are contextually specific to Nebuchadnezzar and 7 years. They see in that, without any indication that they should see this into that, that has a larger fulfillment, as I said. And they associate the removal of Zedekiah with 607 BCE, which, as we know, has some serious questions about it as well. But we're not going to get into that. It is important, obviously, right, if they're going to use an interpretation, not anything explicit or even anything that suggests there's some other fulfillment. There's nothing. They just believe there is. Okay? So there's no basis in the text for it, but they think there's these other texts that together provide them a basis for coming up with this other application. So it's very important you understand that. Their view of 1914 and 607 and Zedekiah, and of course with 1914, what they believe happened was God's kingdom was born with Jesus as king. They don't believe, Watchtower Society and Jehovah's Witness supporters, that Jesus became king of God's kingdom in the first century. They believe he was raised to God's right hand and then basically in a waiting position while God puts his enemies beneath his feet. And so Watchtower Society believes that the period from the first century after Jesus was resurrected to 1914 was basically a waiting period during which time God the Father subjected all things to Jesus' feet, or put his enemies beneath his feet, right? Psalm 110:1. We're going to get to it in some associated texts. So he's waiting. God's putting his enemies beneath his feet. And then in 1914, he throws the devil and his demons out of heaven and becomes king of God's kingdom. And Watchtower Society believes that from that point forward, Jesus began to identify more specifically, for example, than in the case of people like Russell or others, a group of individuals that he would appoint in 1919 as the faithful and discreet slave of Matthew chapter 24, that would be given authority over all, basically, that there would be this group of Christians that would have authority over all other Christians to give them their food, right? Spiritual food is how they understand it at the proper time. Of course, in the illustration of Matthew 24 involving the faithful slave and the evil slave, it doesn't say anything about spiritual food. It's clearly talking about just basic service to the master and how you would attend his house and what you would give his domestics, right? His belongings, his food, his other servants. Maybe that would involve some kind of spiritual encouragement and stuff like that. So it's not explicit, but it's possible. We don't need to rule that out to discuss whether the Watchtower Society has been doing that. Certainly, it would not appear that they provide like physical food and things like that, right? That's Watchtower Society really is not today, and for many, many decades, been like a charity organization. I mean, they will look after their own in many ways, but it's not really like so giving and charitable that you have this regular taking care of people, whether in the organization or not. And if you're not, well, while some individuals might help, and maybe even the organization sometimes, that's not the policy, right? The policy, they don't have a charitable outreach to anyone outside the organization, except for, of course, the ministry. Now, again, that doesn't mean individual Watchtower members or others won't do some things like that, but they believe they'd been appointed in 1919 and that God's kingdom was born in 1914, and this is all attached. Well, the 1919 has got a little more to it, but basically without the 1914, there is no 1919, right? So we're not going to get into the whole why 1919 today and the other interpretations they use for that, because again, it won't matter. If 1914 is not when God's kingdom was born, none of that other stuff matters. It's all false doctrine, false teaching. And as many Watchtower members and former members know, if you look at page 154 of the You Can Live Forever book, I'm not going to break out a bunch of Watchtower literature here. It's not necessary, right? We all have either read it or you can go read it whenever you want. It's right there, plain as day. If you look at the You Can Live Forever book, which many of us, including myself, studied when we were learning the truth. See, there I go again, right? Reverting, calling them the truth. It's because it's how we always viewed what we were a part of. And of course, you do learn a lot of truth. There's no doubt about that. You're studying the Bible, right? And you're learning a lot of things. This is true for many other groups, right? You're going to learn a lot about the Bible, many religions, and certainly in the Watchtower. Nothing about what I'm going to say here in any way means there aren't good things in regards to the Watchtower's teaching, conduct, morals in many ways, right? That doesn't mean they don't have problems, but there are certainly positive things that should and must be acknowledged if we're going to be fair and not condemn someone completely, right? That's not what this is about. I have and I do recognize many good things in the Watchtower's history. But there are also many problems, right? I recognize many things in the Jewish history. That doesn't mean that the Jewish history since the first century, right? It doesn't mean that they are doing the right things entirely, including accepting the Messiah. But if you look back, right, there's not this linear, monolithic, one style, one type of faithful and discreet slave or governing body member, right? Basically, we'll just say the ones running the Watchtower. If you look at the group that's doing that today, compared with the group that, say, translated the New World Translation, right? Back in the 40s and 50s. Well, so today, we're dealing with a lot of stuff, right? We got the 1914 that we're going to deal with extensively today. We got 1975. We got the generation thing that's been totally changed now, right? I was saying earlier, if you look at page 154 of the You Can Live Forever book, you'll see a little caption there that explicitly states, the 1984 edition, that the generation that saw the events, that was alive to see the events of 1914, will not die off until the end comes. And then we all know the Awake magazine repeatedly featured that was God's promise that would happen, right? And they've changed that. That's no longer what they believe. They believe something really, really strange, because obviously the generation that saw the events of 1914 is either dead or almost dead. So they basically, with their interpretation of 1914 in this generation, they put a time limit, like an expiration date on their organization, right? It's incredible why they would do that. The only reason I can think of is they either really believed it was here, which you're going to see there's really no evidence supporting that, and a ton of evidence contradicting it. Explicit. I'm going to show you. But they still either really believed it, or it was just the most effective way to control people, right? Because if you're constantly thinking the end is almost here, it's like the last day of the last day of the last second of the last minute, we're done, right? That's how they are. That's how they've been for a long time. They got everybody fired up about 1975. It was an embarrassment, a humiliation. I'm glad I was only 3 when that happened. And then they just kept going with the generation until now what? It's this overlapping ridiculousness. They literally believe today that if you knew someone who was alive in 1914, you're part of that generation that saw the events of 1914. It's at this point, Watchtower supporters, you have to see that is ridiculous. That is so desperate and dumb that if you fall for that, if you believe, go ahead and believe believe whatever you want, but if you believe this generation not passing away until all these things occur could apply to people that weren't in that generation, but that knew someone who was, and then it can just, and then if someone knows that person who knew someone who was in that generation, then it's still go. It's insane. Okay, they have now created an absurd understanding of this generation for no other reason than they taught false doctrine in God's and Jesus' name, even attributing it to them. God promises. Jesus teaches this generation saw the events 1914. No, not going to pass away. Now they don't believe that anymore. And that kept a lot of people in the organization in the 90s and even early 2000s because, and even in the 80s, right after the 1975 fiasco, because the 1914 doctrine teaching still connected this generation of people with an expiration date. When they die, or before they pass away, right? We're all it's over. So that's an expiration date, Watchtower. You are so close to losing everything. And really for many people, you already have. You changed your generation doctrine. You want people to completely trust you. God and Jesus completely trust you. This ridiculous stuff that's so dangerous and damaging to people. How dare you ask for that stuff? Ask for complete trust? You know, that makes me so angry when I see a bunch of false teachers and liars, but who look like these nice older men, asking you to completely trust them with this stupid, innocent smile behind which are dead men's bones. It's just a whitewashed grave, like Jesus said, of the scribes and Pharisees. They're liars, everybody. They're whitewashed. You understand? They look clean. They act clean. They are full of death and false teaching. They're literally forcing you to trust them or be shunned by people who believe the end is almost here no matter what. It's very dangerous for you in the Watchtower right now. And maybe it's been for a long time. But as I was saying earlier, it's not linear. It's not monolithic, right? Are you going to blame Fred Franz for Rutherford? Right? Rutherford. He comes in after Russell and he starts telling everybody that 1925 is going to see the resurrection of ancient worthies who will return to the earth. And you know what? We just had to buy them a mansion in San Diego called Beth Serene so that when they get here, they'll have a place to stay. The place where Rutherford and Knorr and others were staying. Just keeping it nice for them, right? This is ridiculous. This is idiotic. And true, Rutherford did say he made an ass of himself. Yeah, you should have stepped down. You should have immediately removed yourself for that level of stupidity, right? Publishing. It's not like you're just telling her, hey, I think these Jubilee cycles and everything, I think, 1925. No, you put out this booklet, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, another lie. It's just one after the other with Watchtower's interpretation of prophecy. They don't get anything right. Nothing in modern day times. What? What have they gotten right? Any interpretation of chronology or seat times and seasons? I don't see it. 1975, 1925, this generation, we're talking about 1914, but I'm giving you a broader look at the people involved, right? Just because they're teaching false doctrine and leading people to their spiritual and, in many cases, literal death today, that does not mean they don't have good parts of their history, very important contributions to the understanding of God and Jesus. The exact same things in different regards could be said of the Catholics, many Protestant groups, the Jews. We cannot allow the fact that we shouldn't listen to them and what they're teaching make us so angry and hateful. And I like I said earlier, when it comes to this complete, it does make me angry. The fact that anyone, especially someone who claims God and Jesus appointed them so that they could be completely trusted by God and Jesus while they make all these mistakes for over 100 years, blaming God and Jesus, it's disgusting. It's sick. It's a perverted mindset that would ask you to completely trust them and then tell you God and Jesus completely trust them. That is ridiculous. You should all leave immediately until they repent of that. Just that one, right? We got a lot, but let's just see if they can change that one. That will basically bring about everything else. Because if you completely trust them, well, then anything goes, whatever they say, right? You can't do that, Watchtower people. I already talked about it. I did a whole video about it. But that's not necessarily the group we've always had, right? So we can't blame necessarily Fred Franz, Knorr, and some others for 1925, right? Maybe there was some involvement, right? Franz was back there, but really that was Rutherford's baby from all appearances. Now, they went along with it, and they kind of were a part of it. Same with the 1975 group and all this stuff, but nonetheless, right, between 1925 and 1975, they didn't really have any dates. They kind of got a little excited in the 1940s, a couple things there, but because of the World War. But, you know, for a good 50 years there, 1925 to 1975, let me tell you something. Watchtower did some really good stuff. They did some bad, you know, there were a lot of things happening, right? Medicine, blood, there was stuff going on that's a little weird. I'm not saying everything in their history in that period was perfect, but they really did some good work there. I think they really had some good people who really believed, really thought that these understandings, right, 1940, that they just had enough merit and things were unusual enough in terms of what was happening in the world, but combined with everything else, right? I think you really had a motivated group of people for a period there, and they got so involved, right? They got the New World Translation done. But then, you know, all that great learning and everything, it seems, made them do what they weren't supposed to do and write about times and seasons. The very thing that Paul says we don't need anything about. We're not supposed to get excited about that. Jesus says you're not going to know the day and the hour. Thief in the night. That wasn't good enough for them. It's not good enough for Watchtower. They have to provide an interpretation of all these things. And they do. And it constantly changes. Like I said earlier, for example, with the generation. All right. So here we are, right? That's how I see the Watchtower organization. I don't see it as just monolithic, linearly evil or false organization. Not by any means. Nor would I see most other groups that way. But obviously, I recognize certain contributions of people in the Watchtower that I find particularly impressive. Right? Their willingness to make themselves look pathetic in the eyes of Christendom scholars and others by going completely against the Trinitarian translations of the Bible, which really require an interpretation to even get to the Trinity. But the way they translate it, right, it allows them to more easily do that, or they translate it for people who already do it. That's what I mean. So Watchtower didn't care about that. They looked at it. They could have. They could have just translated it and stayed with the Trinity, and they would have been a lot more accepted, right? So it took courage. It took something to say, no, you know, you guys have all this learning, you have all this history, but there are other translations and others, and now we're looking at this, and that's not what it says, right? So I believe they did a lot of very important work. Again, just like many other groups. Do the Catholics, have they not done incredible work in terms of preservation of the Bible in many respects, and certain individuals within the organization doing a lot of charitable activities? It doesn't mean all the popes or everyone was great, by far from it, right? So it's very important to me that regardless of how this live stream goes and what we end up concluding, that we don't develop this hatred for the Watchtower. I'm angry. I'm angry that they're deceiving people. There's no doubt about it. The current group of people should be rejected. But the Watchtower members have been beaten down. They've been weakened so badly, they can't. Some try. Some good members, I know. But very few are left. And there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they will be able to do unless they can get control of the organization and then dissolve it, right? We don't need this corporate structure. We don't need a big business. You know what we need? 2 or 3 gathered in Jesus' name so that there he will be. That's all we ever needed, by the way. So I'm angry at what they're currently doing, but that does not blind me to the fact that they've done some good, and many before them have done good that has to be accepted in ways that don't distort the truth. So now back to 1914. Was God's kingdom born in that year? Well, according to the Watchtower, it was. I already explained the basis for their interpretation. So let's go ahead and take a look at Daniel. I've already done a video, or maybe a couple really, analyzing Daniel 4. I'll put the links below. I don't think I put those below, but many of you probably know those videos. I'll put them in there, though, if you want to get into the Daniel 4 issues. Why I say you can just read it yourself, right? You just read Daniel 4 and you can see that the only application there being made of the 7 times is to Nebuchadnezzar and him being removed and then allowed to return as king. And once he understood who's responsible for that, he was too arrogant. That's exactly what it says. There's nothing else said about anyone else or anything else. But in another section of Daniel chapter 7, there is something there about God's kingdom and about Jesus. So let's go ahead and pull it up. I'll bring up the split screen. We'll use the New World Translation, obviously, right? We're talking about 1914, Watchtower teaching. And of course, I believe the New World Translation is the most superior English translation available to date. I don't really care what you whack jobs say out there. I've done videos. I'll address any issue you have. NWT is not perfect, but it blows away your versions of the Bible. The King James is outdated. It has texts in there that aren't even in the Bible, right? 1 John 5:7, the way it reads. And then in Revelation 1:8, I believe, has Jesus calling himself the Alpha and the Omega. That's not in the Bible, people. Yeah, that's been added by Trinitarians later. So you have to be careful with the King James, not only for its promotion of false doctrine, adding text to the Bible, to Revelation no less, right? Which warns against doing that. And of course, they ripped God's name out of the Bible, but what, 4 times maybe? And there might be a more modern version that has a divine name in it. But look, the NWT blew you guys out of the water. I literally humiliated all of you Trinitarian Bibles and Bible scholars because you're ridiculous. Your removal of the divine name alone disqualifies your translation. It should not be used, and if used, it should be explained. It's a morally bankrupt translation, but it has a majority of text in a usable manner, so at this point we're okay. And we don't need every text to be correct to get the truth, by the way. But you know what we do need? We need to have what's in the text presented in the translation. And most of you scholars just can't figure out a way to do that with the divine name, can you? All your learning, all your understanding, and all you can come up with is Yahweh. Unbelievable. So the Watchtower Society gets major credit for absolutely humiliating you ridiculous scholars and Bible translators that refuse to even put Yahweh many times, right? But you can't even figure out. I can figure it out. You guys have a lot more education and learning than me. And I can go to these ancient sources and see, oh, Yah-oh. Oh, the final hey is a vowel marker for the final O sound. Oh, Yah, undisputed form. Okay, good. It's so easy. So why don't they do it? Because they don't believe it. It's the same with 1914. If it's so easy, Greg, why doesn't the Watchtower accept it? If it's so obvious and explicit, like you say, Greg, that God's kingdom was born in the 1st century, what does the Watchtower do? They don't believe it. They believe they are special and have been appointed in association with an interpretation that no one would come up with outside of them, or has. And that has been proven wrong for decades. And I'm going to finish it right now. I'm not going to get into 607 anymore. I don't need to get into the 7 times of Daniel 4 anymore. I'm going to finish the Watchtower's understanding of 1914 once and for all. I'm sure it's already been finished by others. I'm going to do it right now. I've already, in my opinion, laid down what I think is pretty credible evidence that shows it's not correct. I'm going to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt right now. Explicit, right? Remember the video I did? If it's not explicit, dismiss it. Are you ready? This is the end, Watchtower people. If you don't want to know the truth about when God's kingdom with Jesus as active king, if you don't want to know the truth about that, turn it off. Leave the live stream right now. Go back to your organization, go back to sleep, and stop getting involved in these issues. You're actually showing a lack of faith by doing so. The Watchtower says you have to trust them completely. So why are you here? Because you don't. All right, then that's fine. But you need to be honest with yourself. Stop lying to yourselves. Can we just start being honest with ourselves for once? You don't fully trust the Watchtower. That's why you're here. If you did, you wouldn't be here. That's pretty obvious, right? Because they wouldn't want you here. So you would trust them and not listen. So you don't completely trust them. So in the end, you're already not believing in what they teach. But the association, right? The familiarity, the possibility you could be wrong. They keep a lot of people that really don't trust the Watchtower in the Watchtower. So I'm hoping that this will once and for all, for those of you who I know don't trust the Watchtower 100%, but still kind of believe it and think they're probably the most correct. We're not told to go to the most correct. We're told to be on the side of the truth. Right? The most correct is on the side of the truth, not people who just promote lies and avoid the information that would show them that's a lie, that's a false teaching. So here we go. Explicit biblical proof. Now, not every verse we read initially is going to provide that, but you're going to see as we develop this, there's no doubt. It is without doubt or dispute based on explicit texts. God's kingdom with Jesus as king was born in the first century. Satan was thrown down out of heaven, Revelation 12, first century. You ready? Here we go. Let's go to Daniel chapter 7. We're going to do some reading today, but reading today is critical because the material is going to come alive. It is. And when I started reading, I thought, this is a lot to read. It just came alive. And I was like, this is going to be perfect. That's how it has to be done. You need to see this, and you will. And when we're done, I don't see how you're going to be able to continue to believe that God's kingdom was born any other time than in the first century. Let's take a look. Daniel chapter 7. Let's start in verse 13. And we'll read to part of 28. Ready? Let me just check real quickly to make sure we don't have any issues on the chat. Okay, looks like you guys are all right. I want to make sure I wasn't letting a bunch of nuts go loose here. In fact, let me go ahead and move. I usually have the chat over on the side where I can see it while I'm reading. I didn't have it there yet, so let me do that. In case anyone goes nuts, you can disagree. That's fine. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Explicit stuff, right? I said I would give you explicit proof. So let me do that. You can talk though. Just keep it. Know that we're getting into this, so more is coming. You might want to wait and see what I have to say or what I'm going to show you from the Bible. All right, Daniel 7, verse 13. I kept on beholding in the visions of the night, and see there, with the clouds of the heavens, someone like a son of man happened to be coming. And to the Ancient of Days he gained access, and they brought him up close, even before that one. I'm not going to get into some of the Trinitarian issues involved in this text. This isn't that discussion. I've already done a video about that in part, and I will be doing another one in the future. We're going to continue based on the reading in the NWT. We're talking about Watchtower issues, 1914. Verse 14, and to him there were given rulership and dignity and kingdom, that the peoples, national groups, and languages should all serve even him. His rulership is an indefinitely lasting rulership that will not pass away, and his kingdom one that will not be brought to ruin. Okay, so the question is, when did this begin? When did this happen? Right? So we have the Son of Man in heaven with God. He's being given rulership, dignity, and kingdom so that peoples, national groups, and languages should serve him. Right? This is earthly stuff. It looks like it's talking about, right? Peoples, national groups, languages. Verse 15, as for me, thank you very much, BJ. Verse 15, as for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed on account of it, and the very visions of my head began to frighten me. I went up close to one of those who were standing, that I might request from him reliable information on all this. And he said to me, as he went on to make known to me the very interpretation of the matters. So this is what Daniel saw means. Now, before this, he had some other visions, right? I'm not going to read all of Daniel and the different beasts and things that come about, right? He's got a series of visions that are going on here. This is in the first year of Belshazzar, right? The king of Babylon, not in Nebuchadnezzar. So we're in a totally different period of time here. It's not like many centuries removed, right? But this isn't the Daniel 4 context. So we're in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, right? And so here's the interpretation of what Daniel saw according to one of the individuals that is with him. Verse 17, as for these huge beasts, because there are four kings that will stand up from the earth. But the holy ones of the Supreme One will receive the kingdom, and they will take possession of the kingdom for time indefinite, even for time indefinite upon times indefinite. Then it was that I desired to make certain concerning the fourth beast, which proved to be different from all the others, extraordinarily fearsome, the teeth of which were of iron and the claws of which were of copper, which was devouring and crushing, and which was treading down even what was left with its feet. Verse 20, and concerning the 10 horns were on its head, and the other horn that came up and before which 3 fell, even that horn had eyes and a mouth, speaking grandiose things. A lot of this parallels with Revelation, as you can see. And the appearance of which was bigger than its fellows. Okay, so it starts out talking about those other beasts. It's getting to the Son of Man part. Hang on. But we're going to read the context. I'm starting at the vision of the Son of Man. He's going back and he's being told what the interpretation of the beasts in the vision are. He says, I kept on beholding when that very horn made war on the holy ones as it was prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment itself was given in favor of the holy ones of the Supreme One, and the definite time arrived that the holy ones took possession of the kingdom itself. That's very interesting, isn't it? What does this sound like here? We're going to read it. This sounds like Revelation chapter 12 and some of the surrounding material. Right? Look, talks about the holy ones of the Supreme One. Talked about them up here, how they received the kingdom. And then it talks about how this horn made war upon the holy ones and started to prevail against them, right? Revelation 12 says that the dragon made war against the holy ones after being thrown out of heaven. It was very similar. We're going to get to more parallels. Verse 22, until the Ancient of Days came, judgment, we read that. So then the Ancient of Days comes, renders judgment, and they take possession of the kingdom, right? Verse 23, this is what he said. As for the fourth beast, there's a fourth kingdom that will come to be upon the earth. That will be different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the earth, trample it down, and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of that kingdom, there are 10 kings that will rise up. And still another one will rise up after them. And he himself will be different from the first ones. 3 kings he will humiliate. And he will speak even words against the Most High. And he will harass continually the holy ones themselves of the Supreme One. And he will intend to change times and law. And they will be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. That's very interesting, isn't it? What can you think of in Revelation that parallels this? There is something. We'll get to this 3.5 times, but what about this? What about this different king? This different king that rises up, harasses the holy ones of the Supreme One, changes times and law, and they're given into his hand. That is the wild beast of Revelation. The wild beast that does what? Changes law so you can't buy or sell without having the wild beast mark. And what happens to the Christians when the wild beast changes law? Changes times and law in order to, where were we? Change times and law, and they will be given into his hands for 3.5 times. That parallels in Revelation 11, as you're going to see. But the wild beast in Revelation is the one that is spoken of as harassing, right? As changing law to put under obligation the Christians. And if they don't, then we're in a heavily persecuted state, which is why Jesus in Matthew 25 says that the non-Christians who help us when we're in need, right? We're hungry, we're thirsty, we're naked, we're in prison. That's during the time of the wild beast, persecution, right? Because that leads right into the coming of the Son of Man, the destruction of the wild beast, separation of the sheep and the goats, and the imprisonment of Satan for 1,000 years. That's why he then lets them go into the new earth, over which New Jerusalem reigns. So, the only parallel you're going to find to this verse in Daniel 25, at least this part, that the king that rises up different from the others, that I believe is the wild beast, and that harasses the holy ones, changes times and laws so that they're given into his hand. I believe that's the account involving the wild beast forcing people to take the mark so they can buy and sell, or they won't eat, right? Or they won't have what they need, which is exactly why non-Christians who help the Christians in that state, in spite of the persecution of the wild beast, are allowed to enter into the new earth. Because they took care of us when no one else would, and when we couldn't take care of ourselves because of this beast changing times and law so that we are under its control. And that's going to be the time where, as Revelation says, where endurance is going to be needed, right? That's why it's such a big deal in Revelation and in Matthew 25. That period right there at the end. That's when we're going to get it the worst, because the wild beast is trying to break us. All right, now, we saw also, right, this is for 3.5 times. Keep that in mind. Let's finish. We're going to read just right here. And the court itself proceeded to sit, and his own rulership they finally took away, in order to annihilate him and to destroy him totally. Right? That's the wild beast being destroyed. And the kingdom and the rulership and the grandeur of the kingdoms under all the heavens were given to the people who are the holy ones of the Supreme One. Their kingdom is an indefinitely lasting kingdom, and all the rulerships will serve and obey them. This is very interesting, isn't it? Because we saw earlier the Son of Man was given rulership, authority, and kingdom, right? But right now, look what's happening. We have events that take place involving this king, this beast that persecutes the Christians by changing law. And then the wild beast is destroyed after the court takes its seat, right? So wild beast persecutes the Christians for 3.5 times. Court takes its seat, renders judgment. Wild beast is destroyed. And then what happens? Rulership, grandeur of the kingdoms and all the heavens were given to who? The Son of Man? No. The people who are the holy ones of the Supreme One. Now think about that. When does that happen? It happens after Armageddon, right? Because Christians aren't caught up to be with the Lord until he arrives to render judgment to the nations. And then we're caught away to be with Jesus. In the house of my Father, there are many abodes. I'm going away to prepare a place for you. New Jerusalem, the kingdom, city, from which we will then restore the earth, bring about the conditions, help cure the nations of people that were brought in. It doesn't say at this point, see, the reason I believe this is so important is because the Son of Man already received the kingdom. Now, Watchtower will say, well, that happened in 1914, and then the Holy Ones of the Supreme One, the Anointed, they receive it, when the resurrection occurs and Satan is destroyed, or imprisoned, I'm sorry. So the question isn't whether Jesus gets the kingdom before the Holy Ones of the Supreme One, kind of like it describes here in Daniel, right? It seems to be, not everything in Daniel or in Revelation it's not chronological. It doesn't happen in order. All parties agree on that. Some parts are in order, but not all parts. There's different visions and different things that occur out of sequence. Some that even go back to other parts of earlier visions. So right here, though, it seems to me, okay, so we understand it's not always chronological, but again, Watchtower and I agree, Jesus received the kingdom first. That appears to be what is described right here, right? He gets it first. And then it talks about the Holy Ones getting the kingdom after him, taking the possession, right? After these 4 beasts, then the Holy Ones. And then it talks about how this 4th beast and this special horn and king are going to rise up and persecute the Holy Ones of the Supreme One. Then that beast is destroyed, and then the kingdom is given to them. So Watchtower believes that happened. Jesus got it. Watchtower believes this part here, 1914. And Watchtower believes this part here, the Holy Ones of the Supreme One getting the kingdom, is after the resurrection, right? After Armageddon. I believe that Jesus received the kingdom in the 1st century, and that the Holy Ones of the Supreme One get the kingdom after Armageddon. Right? What does Revelation 6:11 say? Rest a little while longer until the number of your slaves are sealed. What does 1 Thessalonians 4 say? When the Lord descends from heaven, the resurrection occurs, and those living are caught away to be with him. So that's clearly when they begin ruling as kings, right? Even Paul says, have you begun ruling as kings without us? So that hadn't happened at the time he wrote to the Corinthians. Jesus was resurrected, and I'm going to show already ruling as king in the 1st century, but not the Christians, not the Holy Ones of the Supreme One. They get the kingdom after this beast is destroyed. Right? So it talks about that. And then let's read this part. Up to this point is the end of the matter. Right? So this is basically right at the start of the 1,000-year reign. The time when the Holy Ones get the kingdom and the beast is destroyed. And then in Revelation 12, of course, it goes even further to talk about the time when everybody stands up, paralleling Revelation 20 through 22, the final judgment that occurs after the 1,000 years, not during the 1,000 years Watchtower. Nothing says that. says they are resurrected after the 1,000 years are ended. It's another issue we have to deal with, but we've already dealt with it. I did a whole video on it. Okay, so I think we clearly read and hopefully understood the most important aspects of this section of Daniel and how it refers to a time when the Son of Man would be given rulership, authority, and kingdom, so the peoples, national groups, and languages would all serve even him. Now, all Watchtower people say, well, see, Greg, that has to be at the start of the 1,000-year reign, because that's when, the great crowd of all nations, tribes, and people, although, that's how they see it, right, are on the earth. And so Jesus he's being given rulership, authority, and kingdom. But Watchtower people, you believe he got the kingdom in 1914, right? So even in your own view, Jesus received this rulership, dignity, and kingdom in a way that since 1914, he's been ruling over all these people. And I'm going to show that is true. From the first century, though, not just since 1914. But it's important to understand that Watchtower believes this happened in 1914, right? He received the kingdom in 1914, and maybe they'd still push this people's national groups and languages serving him off into the millennial reign, but it doesn't do that. Either way, it won't make any difference ultimately. I just kind of want to represent some of the Watchtower thinking so that the Watchtower people watching this feel represented, right? So keep that in mind that, the receiving the kingdom at some point, this is 1914 to Watchtower, first century to me, involves this ruling of the people's national groups and languages. Same thing then, Holy Ones of the Supreme One take possession of the kingdom after the wild beast is destroyed. Now, let's go to Revelation. Let me show you the parallels to what we just read. It's incredible stuff. And Watchtower does note some of this. But because of the 1914 and because they don't understand the explicit teaching of the Bible that the kingdom was born in the first century, which I'm going to fully establish soon, it doesn't come out right. It leads to all these crazy applications of trumpets and bowls, and like I talk about in my 3 dissertations and elsewhere. Right, they apply a lot of that stuff that no one even to conventions and proclamations that happened in the early 20th century that no one even remembers anymore, early to mid. And it clearly do not talk about the things Watchtower says they talk about. That aside, look at this. Look at this with me. I think this is incredible. We're going to read Revelation 11, 12, and just very small part of 13. But this real quick. Listen. Verse 1, and a reed like a rod was given me, and he said, get up, measure the temple of God and the altar and those worshiping it. But as for the courtyard that is outside the temple, cast it clear out. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Does anyone know how long 42 months is? 3.5 years. 3.5 times. Just like we read in Daniel. And I will cause my 2 witnesses to prophesy 1,260 days dressed in sackcloth. Does anyone know how many years 1,260 days is? 3.5. These are symbolized, the 2 witnesses he's talking about here, by the 2 olive trees, the 2 lampstands that are standing before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, the 2 witnesses in this case, fire issues forth from their mouths and devours their enemies. And if anyone should want to harm them in this manner, he must be killed. Verse 6, these have authority to shut up heaven, that no rain should fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have authority over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every sort of plague as often as they wish. The Watchtower applies this to themselves. They apply the two witnesses to themselves, and they believe that all of this is basically representative of the impact of their preaching work upon the earth. That it's just so devastating. This is how it's described, right? And then in verse 7 it says, and when they finish their witnessing, the wild beast that ascends out of the abyss will make war with them and conquer them and kill them. Just like we read in Daniel chapter 7, in association with the holy ones of the Supreme One. And their corpses will be on the broad way of the great city, which is in a spiritual sense called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was also impaled. Verse 9, and those of the peoples, tribes, and tongues, and nations will look at their corpses for 3.5 days, and they do not let their corpses be laid in a tomb. And those dwelling on the earth rejoice over them and enjoy themselves, and they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those dwelling on the earth. And after 3.5 days, Spirit of life from God entered into them. They stood upon their feet, and great fear befell those beholding them. And they heard a loud voice out of heaven say, come on up here. And they went up into heaven in the cloud. And their enemies beheld them. Kind of just like the apostles beheld Jesus being taken away into the cloud. And of course, once he got in the cloud, they couldn't see him anymore. Either way, isn't that interesting? All these individuals, or the two witnesses, but that seem to symbolize more, even according to Watchtower, than just two, or maybe it's two prominent individuals among the Christians during the time of the wild beast persecution, right? Because they're doing all these things. And then the wild beast comes and attacks them, just like in Daniel chapter 7, conquers them and kills them, and then leaves them out for public humiliation. And all the people on the earth at that time are called peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations. Very important. Keep that in mind. Then it says those dwelling on the earth rejoice over them, right? They're dead. Right? They've been put to death. It says right here, conquered and killed them. And they will send, and during this time when they're being killed and put to death, right, which I believe is the time of the wild beast forcing people to take its mark in order to, basically persecute the Christians. So this wild beast, when did the Christians start being killed? The 1st century, right? It's hard for me to find a time other than the 1st century when this persecution began. Unless we're going to say that it is a different time of persecution reserved for the end that is just different than what happened in the 1st century. But in Revelation 6, right, it talks about how the people that want revenge for being put to death, they're told that they need to rest until the rest of their brothers are put to death just like they were. So there doesn't seem to be much difference from the people already dead and those who are about to be put to death when it comes to this issue, right? Obviously, people are put to death differently, but it's all because of the wild beast. It's all because of the satanic system. It's all because of these activities here. Although, again, there is a possibility there could be a special period of persecution. The question is, are we simply in the period during which the wild beast has already ascended and has been leveling out this persecution to Christians since the 1st century? And the mark is simply something that represents the type of persecution we suffer relative to the things that aren't that people don't have to endure who aren't Christian? Or is this something special that is still not yet taken place? That's similar to how all the other Christians were put to death, right? Killed just like the rest of your brothers had been killed with the axe. So that, I'm not sure about that. It could be one or the other. It could be that this has been happening, right? Because if you look at Revelation 12, which is what we're heading towards, you're going to see that the dragon, when he's thrown down, immediately starts attacking the Christians. And he immediately brings up this wild beast from the sand of the sea. So I believe, and I'm going to show you explicitly, that happened in the first century. That God's kingdom was born, that all of Jesus' enemies were at that time put beneath his feet, but not the last enemy, right? Death, we'll get to that. And that would, I don't see how Satan could stay in the heavens after just killing the Son of God, and now he has all authority. It seems like the appropriate time to throw him out, rather than let him just continue to blaspheme everybody in heaven. It's over. The Son of Man won. There's no reason to tolerate the devil anymore in heaven. And you're going to see that. And I'm going to show you conclusively that this happened in the first century. But if that's the case, then I think this has been going on the whole time. All right. So we get the 3.5, right? Loud voice. Now, right here, look at this. Right? So they're killed, right? The Christians are killed. But then something happens. Spirit of life from God enters into them. They stand on their feet, and fear enters into those who beheld them. That, to me, is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. The Son of Man descends, and he gives a commanding call, and those dead in union with Christ rise. And then it says they heard a voice say, "Come on up here." And they went up into heaven in a cloud. That's exactly what 1 Thessalonians 4 says. The Lord descends from heaven, commanding call, archangel's voice, God's trumpet, all things associated with the resurrection. Those dead in union with Christ rise first. That's these people. That's the people that have been killed for their witnessing. That the devil has been persecuting since being thrown out of heaven with this wild beast. That in Revelation 6, they're described as having to finish their witnessing. And it says when they do that here, they're killed. Their corpses are laid bare. Spirit of God enters into them. They come back alive. Just like when Jesus says, the dead in union with Christ rise. And then they're all caught away in the clouds to be with the Lord. That's all the Christians right here. This is essentially 1 Thessalonians 4 in a vision, right? In more descriptive terms, being given to John in context of Revelation. Whereas Paul's just remarking about things he knows to be true through his discussion and association with the apostles and scriptures and, of course, Christ himself. But this is fascinating, I find. This, to me, very clearly parallels 1 Thessalonians 4 and what has been happening since the first century. That Christians have been doing their witnessing, prophesying, and then they're killed, resurrected, caught away to be with the Christ in heaven. Now, again, there may be a special, the period at the very end. There does seem to me to be, even though the wild beast has been going on since the first century, in my opinion, there seems to be a special period at the end where there is this, like maybe where we're dealing with this 3.5 times, right? Because if we go back to Daniel real quick, right? Remember in Daniel, I don't want you to lose touch with Daniel too quickly because I believe this parallels what we're reading right here in Daniel chapter 7. Here in verse 10, it says there was a stream of fire flowing out from before him. There was 1,000 thousands kept ministering him. The court took its seat and books were open. Let me check that. I was looking for time. That's right here. Right there. Verse 25, right? It says, he will speak words against the Most High and will harass continually the holy ones of the Supreme One and change times and law, and they will be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time before being destroyed and the kingdom being given to the holy ones. The 1 Thessalonians 4, being caught away to be with the king already, right? The one I'm going to show is already king. But this is talking about the holy ones getting it after the wild beast. So the Son of Man had already gotten it. Then we go through this whole period where the horn makes war on the holy ones, and then times and law is changed in order to persecute them for a time, times, and half a time. 3.5 years. So I believe there could be a special period there where, right, there's this harassment of the holy ones, and then he changes times and law and they're given into his hand. So it seems like the wild beast is unleashed by Satan in the 1st century, as I'm going to show conclusively, wages war, right? This is that right here, harasses continually the holy ones, goes off to wage war with the remaining ones of his seed. But after that, right? After that, the wild beast puts under compulsion everybody. It seems anyway. And that would fit right here. That he changes, the wild beast changes times and law, and the holy ones are given into its hand for a time, times, and half a time. That seems to me to be the time during which this mark, this persecution over the mark, right? This change in times and law, the law, right? You don't have the mark, you can't buy, you can't sell, you can't do nothing. I don't see what else this could really be. It doesn't really, I looked at it very carefully and I tried to find, but it's certainly the most appropriate application. So I think there is this period of harassment, right? War. And then the wild beast that's waging war, one of them anyway, not all of them, but eventually one of them requires by law that we take a mark. And then that puts us in the wild beast's hands for a specific limited period of time, different from what was taking place before, which is this. Does that make sense to everybody? Because it clearly shows the wild beast, in effect, persecuting the holy ones of the Supreme One. It says they're harassed continually, and then he intends to change times and law, and then they'll be given into his hand for a limited time. I believe that is exactly what we're dealing with right here. I mean, it specifically says that the wild beast that ascends out of the abyss will make war with them and conquer them and kill them. Look at that. Makes war with them, conquers them, and kills them. That's a long time, right? It seems like anyway. Well, the killing them part, right? The part where it really gets difficult, where it's not just harassment or war, it's an attempt to be totally in the beast's control by law. The only thing I can see in Revelation that applies to is the 666 issue. The not taking the mark of the beast is what's going to prevent us from being able to, by law, buy and get the things we need to sustain ourselves, which requires other people then to help us during the period where we're enduring prior to the arrival of the Son of Man. And then it says, right, it says the wild beast enjoys them. And let's see. It says he'll cause his witness to prophesy 1,260 days in sackcloth. That's the 3.5 times. Well, Why would they be wearing sackcloth? The only reason people wore that in the Bible is because of their being in a humiliated condition. You're in a state of disfavor. But they're prophesying for God and for the Christ. So who are they in disfavor with? Why are they in sackcloth? Because it's the 3.5 times. It's the period during which the wild beast changed the law in order to get us into its hands, right? In other words, you want to eat, you want to drink, you want to wear clothes, you're going to take this mark. You're going to give up being a Christian if you want to have these temporary benefits. And we're not going to be able to do that. It's going to get really, really hard, right? Even the Bible even says in Revelation, we may get to it later, this is where endurance for the holy ones is necessary. This is where it means endurance for the holy ones, excuse me. So they're prophesying during this period where they've been given over into the hand of the wild beast because of the change in times and law, requiring them to take the mark, which we don't take. And so during this period where we're being heavily persecuted, it seems to me we do have two special individuals who stand up and who prophesy about all this stuff and who are protected by God and Jesus during that time, right there, with authority, even during the period of extreme persecution. But then it says, when that period ends, when the 3.5 times in, the wild beast kills them. And their corpses are laid bare. So this seems to me to be the very end of the wild beast's persecution of the Christians that started with continual harassment, nonstop, just like today. That's the warring that the dragon does in Revelation 12. We're getting to it. But then there's this is harassment that leads to the being delivered into the wild beast's hand through a change in time and law so he can kill them. So the beast can kill us. It seems to me, it just parallels everything so easily. And here we have the very thing that is said, right? So the wild beast, after the 3.5 times at the very end, near what we're approaching Armageddon, 2 witnesses are standing up. All the remaining Christians are being persecuted over the mark of the wild beast. Wild beast finally kills them all, just like Revelation 7:11 says. The rest of your brothers are killed, except for what appears to be maybe some, right? Or maybe Paul just thought some would survive and not be killed. And then later in the Revelation, John sees that everyone is killed. It kind of looks like all the Christians are killed at this point, except, right, the non-Christians who are helping us, who are eventually approved. But the harassment from the wild beast, it says that we are all killed, exposed. But then, and while they're rejoicing, right, because they're during this time when the wild beast is trying to force everybody to do what it wants, Christians won't do it, so they're persecuted due to the law that requires it. And then eventually we're all killed. And the people left on the earth rejoice, who were persecuted by those prophets. And then it says, after 3.5 days, Spirit of life from God entered into them. And they stood upon their feet, and great fear befell those beholding them. So to me, that's the commanding call, dead in union with Christ, being brought back to life. So that right after the last ones have been killed, all this great fear would come upon the earth and the wild beast and those serving it, because now they see that we're back. And then it says right after they're resurrected, they're caught away to heaven in a cloud. It's exactly what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4. We have the exact same information presented to us here. The resurrection of those who are asleep in union with Christ, and the catching away of everybody in the cloud. And then it says, in that hour, a great earthquake occurred. 1/10 of the city fell, and 7,000 persons were killed by the earthquake. And the rest became frightened and gave glory to the God of heaven. Verse 14, the second woe was past. Look, the third woe is coming. The seventh angel blew his trumpet. The loud voices occurred in heaven, saying, the kingdom of the world did become the kingdom of our Lord and his Christ, and he will rule as king forever and ever. And the 24 elders who were seated before God upon their thrones fell upon their faces and worshipped God, saying, we thank you, Lord God, or NWT Jehovah God, I don't agree with that here, the Almighty, the one who is and who was, because you have taken your great power and begun ruling as king. It doesn't tell us when this happened, right? This is another vision. It's not necessarily chronological with this, although I certainly think it could be, because if, as I was just describing, this is right before, the breakout of Armageddon, and where Christians have been resurrected and caught away into the clouds, and now the nations are all that remain, right? And that's how Jesus can say, truly I say to you, the extent that you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. How would the people alive on earth know what he's talking about? Because they had just been killed. They're being resurrected right here. Look, it says, after 3.5 days, Spirit of God in them, they stood upon their feet, and great fear befell those beholding them. So Jesus returns, resurrects those asleep in union with him, who were just killed by the wild beast due to the change in law regarding the mark of the beast and not being able to buy or sell. And the people who were there, who helped us during that time, are not Christian, but are being shown mercy because of what they did. It all parallels, right? It all parallels because at that point, the sheep enter into the new earth. Babylon the Great is destroyed. Satan's imprisoned. The goats are destroyed. So Jehovah is taking his power and ruling as king in that respect, because elements of this world have been removed and the new earth and new heavens are in effect. It doesn't mean Jehovah wasn't always king, just like it doesn't mean that Jesus wasn't king. It doesn't even say, right? Now, the kingdom of the world, if we are going to take this as meaning like right after the resurrection, right after the anointed are caught away, well, it's the same thing as what I just described right here. It says Jehovah took his great power and began ruling as king because of the newness of the rule and authority being established and the destruction of the old remnants. Doesn't mean that Jehovah isn't still king now, and it doesn't mean, like we're going to read in a moment, Jesus isn't king at this point. It means that they're kings during a time during which other kings are actually ruling as well, and I'm going to prove that to you in just a moment. Right? So, in fact, I'll do it real quickly and we'll come back to it. If we just go back to Revelation 1:5, look right here. He says, these are greetings, John, to the 7 congregations in Asia. May you have undeserved kindness from the one who is, who was, and who is coming, and from the 7 spirits, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, firstborn from the dead, the ruler of the kings of the earth. So, he's already the faithful witness, he's already the firstborn of the dead, and he's already the ruler of the kings of the earth. It happened in the first century, everybody. But this isn't even close to the explicit evidence I have that I'm going to show you. This is explicit, though. This text, Revelation 1:5, explicitly, Watchtower people, teaches that Jesus was already the king. He's the ruler of the kings of the earth right here in the first century. So when it says in Revelation 11 that the kingdom of the world became the kingdom of our Lord and his Christ, and he will rule as king forever and ever, that's him solely taking over authority with the holy ones of the supreme one, of course, right? They're given the kingdom as well. But the rulers of the kings of the earth, the demonic princes and other human authorities that are allowed to exist during the time when sinful humans are all throughout the earth and have to be managed in this way, And before the devil is thrown into prison, right? He's active. He's down here, roaring lion, wild beast, demonic beings in Babylon the Great. All this stuff is happening. That stops at Armageddon, right? All that allowance and rulership and the kings and things, the wild beasts, that sort of shared authority, but all subject to the Christ who rules the kings of the earth. That's what it's talking about, right? Just like when it's talking about Jehovah doing that. They're both ruling at the point after which the wild beast is destroyed and Satan's in prison, because nobody else is also ruling with them, except for the ones that do what they are doing. There's no other rulers governing nations in ways that would be outside of the kingdom of the authority and kingdom of the Christ, right? In this way, it's the kingdom of the world that becomes. He's already ruling the kings of the earth. He already has all authority, and I'm going to prove it in just a minute, in addition to Revelation 1:5. But once the wild beast is destroyed, all of its authority is gone. Once Satan's imprisoned, all of his authority is gone. Once all the kings of the earth that Jesus is ruling over, according to Revelation 1:5, are removed, all their authority is gone. And in that way, they're taking their power and ruling as kings. It doesn't say that they only started ruling as kings from here. And that wouldn't even be correct, of course, with Jehovah anyway. Or with Jesus. We just read Revelation 1:5. Matthew 28:18 says he's given all authority in heaven and on earth. All authority, Watchtower people. There's not all other there. There's no other authority except the one who subjected all things to him. That's the only one that he does not have subject to him. Now you're going to say, well, no, it was still a process ongoing. Let's talk about that. Let's see. When were all of Jesus' enemies put beneath his feet? Did he just sit at God's right hand in the first century and we had to wait until 1914 and then all his enemies were put as a footstool for his feet? Let's take a look at Revelation chapter 2. Revelation 2. I'll just give you the answer right now. In one sense, yes, Watchtower, just not in the way you think. And this is going to come as quite a shock to you, I believe, because I don't ever hear any of you referring to these texts the way I'm going to. But I think you're going to see that that's the right way. Just watch. Revelation 2:26. To him that conquers and observes my deeds down to the end, I will give authority over nations. And he shall shepherd the people with an iron rod, so they'll be broken to pieces like clay vessels, the same as I have received from my Father. He's already received it. Just like in Daniel 7, Son of Man received dignity, authority, and kingdom, after which the holy ones of the Supreme One receive it. After they're conquered by the wild beast, right? That's exactly what he says. To him that conquers, observes my deeds down to the end, I'll give authority over nations, the same as I received from my Father. He's already the ruler of the kings of the earth. He's already king. But they can get it, just like Daniel 7 shows, if they're faithful all the way to death. Just like Revelation 6:11 teaches as well. And I will give him the morning star. Now, let's parallel this with another familiar text, right? Just the same as I received from my Father, right? I believe that clearly shows he's already received authority from the Father. Matthew 28:18 says he has all authority in heaven and on earth. Matthew 28:20, 18 through 20. We'll probably go get to it in a minute, but it's such a well-known text, right? Revelation 1:5, ruler of the kings of the earth. So that seems pretty conclusive, huh? Seems like he's clearly ruling as king already. He received this authority from the Father, consistent with Matthew 28:20, 18 through 20. And he's already the ruler of the kings of the earth, according to Revelation 1:5. let's take a look. Before we go to another text in Revelation, let's go to another text we've read a lot. But let's look at it again. Philippians chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. For this very reason, right? What reason? He died and was faithful. For this very reason, also God exalted him to a superior position and gave him the name that is above every name, so that in the name of Jesus, every knee should bend, of those in heaven and those on the earth and those under the ground. And every tongue should openly acknowledge that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It says right here in the first century document written by Paul that God exalted him after his resurrection to a superior position, higher authority than he had before, and gave him a new name. Seems to me that's a done deal, right? Paul's not saying he's going to get a superior position. He's going to be he's going to have all this authority. He got it after he was brought back to heaven. And that's made clear also in the book of Acts, chapter 2. Acts chapter 2. Look at 32 through 36. This Jesus God resurrected, of which fact we are all witnesses. Therefore, because he was exalted to the right hand of God and received the promised Holy Spirit from the Father, he has poured out this which you see and hear. Right? And then it says, David didn't ascend to the heavens, but Jehovah said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I place your enemies as a stool for your feet. And then the next verse says, therefore, let all the house of Israel know for a certainty, God made, past tense, Watchtower, made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you impaled. It's exactly like Philippians 2. He was exalted to a position as Lord. 1 Corinthians 8:6 says he's our one Lord. Acts 2:36 says, for a certainty God made him both Lord and Christ. So he has all authority, according to Matthew 28. He's the ruler of the kings of the earth, according to Revelation 1:7. He has received authority to break the nations to pieces, according to Revelation 2:28. Philippians 2 and Acts 2 refer to him as already being made Lord with all authority in God's name. Does that prove it? Is that enough? Let's go to Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3. All those for whom I have affection I reprove and discipline. Therefore be zealous and repent. Look, I am standing at the door and knocking. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into his house and take the evening meal with him and he with me. To the one that conquers, right? Just like Revelation 2:26 through 28. One that conquers, I'll give authority over nations, the same as I received from my Father. It's exactly what Daniel chapter 7 said with regard to the holy ones of the Supreme One, that the wild beast would conquer them and then they would be given the kingdom. It's exactly what he's saying right here, right? And then he says, to the one that conquers, I will grant to sit down with me on my throne, even as I conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. So he's at the right hand of God, on God's throne and his own throne. Is that not clear, Watchtower people? Jesus is talking He's in the first century talking to the congregations of the first century, telling them what's happening, what's going on right now. And he says, if you conquer, you're going to sit with me on my throne. I'm on my throne. I conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne because I've been given his authority. Is he at God's right hand, Watchtower people? Doesn't matter, really, does it? Because if he's sitting with his Father on his throne and he's on his throne, who cares if he's at his right hand? So what? He's on the throne. And he's on his own throne. He's on both thrones. The throne the Father has, and on his own throne at God's right hand. How about that? He's already on his throne while sitting with his Father on his throne as the ruler of the kings of the earth, according to what he said earlier in Revelation 1:5, what John wrote earlier. Consistent with what we read earlier in Philippians 2 and Acts 2, that he's been given all authority after being raised to the right hand of God. Consistent with Matthew 28, that he has all authority in heaven and on earth. There's no limitation here. There's no nothing here but total authority. Is that enough? Is that enough? Is that explicit enough to prove Jesus was already king of God's kingdom, having received it, right? What did Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and forward say? He was brought before the Ancient of Days and received rulership, dignity, and kingdom. It's the same thing right here. I conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Revelation 2, 26 through 28. Him that conquers and observes my deeds, I'll give authority over the nations, the same as I received from my Father. Is that any different from Daniel 7, Watchtower people? How could that be different? It says right here, who conquers is given authority over nations. He says he's received that already from the Father. And that's why in Daniel 7, after the Son of Man receives the authority, dignity, and kingdom from the Father, it says peoples, national groups, and languages serve him. Because he has authority over the nations. He is the ruler of the kings of the earth. We read it. We're reading it. It's all right here. It's all consistent with Daniel chapter 7. Every bit of it. It's really incredible when you look at it outside of the Watchtower, right? Because they get into all these self-applications that just, you're never going to see this. You're never going to see it because it's not consistent with their doctrine. They have to self-appoint. They have to all of it is about them. When really it's all about the Father and the Son and us conquering. So right here, we can see Jesus already has authority over nations. He already is sitting on his Father's throne and on his throne, and he's ruling the kings of the earth in the first century. Am I wrong? Is any of this not clear? What other authority other than not having other kings and Satan and the wild beasts would he need to have? None, really, right? They're just allowing all those other authorities that they're ruling, the ruler of the kings of the earth, until they're removed. And then the kingdom of the world becomes the kingdom of our Lord, because there's no other rulers that he's ruling while we're dealing with the sinful and satanic conditions that befit such rulers, because they're ruling sinful people. And so it's perfect to continue to allow the satanic sons of God to continue to be princes over the nations in ways that they'll ultimately be judged for as they manage this sinful world under the authority of the Christ. So, all of this seems so clear to me, but what about this enemies being put beneath your feet, right? Sit at my right hand, the Psalm 110:1 says, and like we read in Acts 2:32 through 36, sit at my right hand until I place your enemies as a stool for your feet. So Watchtower people can say, but okay, Greg, that is all pretty explicit stuff that clearly seems to attribute the kingdom authority and the kingdom related to the what the Son receives in Daniel 7 and what the Holy Ones of the Supremum receive after they conquer. Yeah, all of that seems pretty clear in relation to the Son receiving that in the first century, but it says until his enemies are placed below his feet. So maybe all that association you're talking about in like Acts 2 is he's raised to the right hand, but then there's this period of time and the enemies have to be put beneath his feet, and then all that stuff happens. Well, that's not really consistent with Revelation 2 or 3, right? Because he's already doing that. He's already, Revelation 1:5, ruler of the kings of the earth. He's already received authority over nations from the Father. He's already sitting on the Father's throne. So I just think, Watchtower people, you're misunderstanding what it means to sit at his right hand until his enemies are put beneath his feet. You know why I say that in addition to what I just said? Because of these texts right here. Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. The society makes a big deal out of this. This whole sitting at my right hand until I place your enemies as a footstool for your feet. They really read into that, this time gap between the first century and 1914. With that period being the time when God the Father was doing just that. And yet we can already see from Revelation 3:20, 19 through 21, that the Father's not off his throne. He's still doing things. The Son is simply on his throne with him and on his own throne doing what the Father wants him to do. All to the Father's glory. Look at Matthew chapter 5 on this whole sit at my right hand until your enemies are beneath your feet thing. The Watchtower has blown this. This is a big one. I think this is going to shock some of you. I think the two texts I'm going to show you, well, maybe three, but two for sure, are going to shock you when it comes to this whole sit at my right hand until I place your enemies as a footstool for your feet. You know why I say that? Because that whole placing enemies beneath your feet, that doesn't end until after the 1,000 years. And Watchtower teaches Jesus became king in 1914. Let me show you. Matthew 5:34 and 35. However, I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, because it is God's throne, nor by the earth, because it is the footstool of his feet. That's not the verse I think is going to really shock you, but we had to read this first. We need to remember that the heavens are God's throne. The earth is his footstool. Where is Jesus sitting according to Revelation 3? On God's throne. What's God's throne? Heaven. So what's beneath his feet? The earth as his footstool. Now you may say, yeah, but Greg, Satan and the devil of the demons were still in heaven, so they hadn't been thrown out yet, so not all his enemies had been placed beneath his feet. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. I'm going to prove it to you. You ready? This is the big one, Watchtower people. To me, when I saw this, it was like, whoa. I didn't even realize that before because, again, we don't all see everything. I was staring at it, I was like, I mean, it was so clear, and I was looking at it, and I was thinking, how did I not make that connection before? 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This effectively destroys this whole idea that Jesus was sitting at God's right hand, not as king of God's kingdom, from the first century until 1914. This text completely eliminates that from the category of possible biblical teachings. Ready? 1 Corinthians 15. Let's go ahead and read verses 22 through 29. For just as in Adam all are dying, so also in the Christ all will be made alive, but each one in his own rank. Christ the firstfruits, afterward those who belong to the Christ during his presence, right? Just like we've been reading, just like 1 Thessalonians 4 talks about, just like Revelation 11 talks about, just like Daniel 7 talks about. Christ is first, afterward those who belong to him during his presence, the ones who he descends from heaven to raise up, who stand up and make everyone afraid because they were just put to death in persecution by the wild beast, and then they're all caught up to heaven in the cloud. That's what it's talking about right here, right? You Watchtower people, well, I mean, they have different views on the anointed and how long they'll live, so I won't parallel that with their view here. Next, right? So what's this? They're talking about the resurrection, right? So it says, each his own rank. So Christ is first, firstborn from the dead, ruler of the kings of the earth. Revelation 1:5. After that, those who belong to him during his presence. Revelation 11, 1 Thessalonians 4. Next, the end. When he hands over the kingdom to his God and Father. When he has brought to nothing all government, all authority, and power. For he must rule as king until God has put all enemies under his feet. As the last enemy, death is to be brought to nothing. For God subjected all things under his feet. But when he says all things have been subjected, it is evident is with the exception of the one who subjected all things to him, of course. But when all things have been subjected to him, the Son himself will subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him. God may be all things to everyone, right? It's the end of the 1,000 years, right? Christ doesn't give back the kingdom until after the 1,000 years. We all agree on that. At least Watchtower and Christian Witnesses of Jah people. But did you see what it is that completely, and look, Watchtower people, I'm going to use destroy, it does, right? You call it what you want. This ends your doctrine. Did you see the part that effectively destroys the society's belief about sit at my right hands while I place your enemies as a footstool for your feet? When is the last enemy put beneath his feet, everybody? What does it say? He must rule as king. He must rule as king until God has put all enemies under his feet. He's ruling as king while God is putting his enemies under his feet. And in fact, the last enemy to be put under his feet is death. And that happens, according to Revelation and here, after the 1,000 years. Incredible, huh? Watchtower, for so long, has been telling everybody that this Psalm 110:1, sit at my right hand till I place all your enemies as a footstool for your feet, means that Jesus was resurrected to God's right hand, but didn't begin ruling as king until 1914. The Bible explicitly teaches over and over and over and over again that after Jesus was resurrected and raised to God's right hand, he was given all authority in heaven and on earth. Every knee is to bow to him in heaven, on earth, and under the ground. Those who died faithful to him, right, that he has authority over, and who are raised by him when he returns. That he has been given a name above every name, that he is to be, that God made him Lord in Christ, Acts 2:36. That he's the ruler of the kings of the earth, that he has been given authority over nations, Revelation 1:5, Revelation 2:26-28, and Revelation 3:21 says he's on the throne. He's not just on his throne, he's on the Father's throne, at the Father's right hand, on his own throne, ruling as king. Until God has put all enemies, Watchtower people. Your leaders are deceiving you. They're either incredibly incompetent and couldn't figure out that this text, let's just set every other text we've read before this aside, even though, again, Revelation 1:5, Revelation 2:26-28, Revelation 3:21, Daniel 7, Matthew 28, Philippians 2, Acts 2. Just set all those aside, okay? How could you miss this? How could anyone who believes in the things the Watchtower Society believes and who is forcing other people to believe them or be shunned and condemned, you're judging people, Watchtower, therefore you are condemned by your own judgments. You did it to yourself, Matthew 7, clear as day, right? Yeah, you guys, the amount of judging and condemnation you Watchtower witnesses do is incredible. Absolutely shocking from a Christian standpoint. I don't know how you guys could miss this. Craig Little, you are ridiculous. We're not in Revelation right now, and Revelation is not a series of complete visions. Jesus is directly talking to the first century Christian congregations. Your comment that Revelation is a vision taking place in the future is a joke. He's talking to first century Christians. He's talking about himself and appearing to John and giving a message. He's saying he sat down on his throne. They're sending greetings to the congregations. You are a horrific interpreter, and you are banned from this channel for your ridiculous comments. And not only is everything you just wrote in your ridiculous comment absurd and ridiculous by claiming it's all a vision and all future, is him being the firstborn from the dead future too? Or did that already happen? The ruler of the kings of the earth, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead. Because not only are you ignoring what Jesus plainly teaches in the present, in the first century to John and to the congregations, specifically referring to things that are happening, the sect of Nicholas, all these other things taking place right then and there, Ephesian special apostles being put to the test, right? You're saying none of that's in the first century, huh? You're an idiot. You're a clown. Don't ever come back to this channel again. You're a joke. And you wasted our time with your stupid comment. It's people like you that continue to support liars and false teachers and mislead millions of people. And You know what, Craig? We're talking about 1 Corinthians 15. Why did you post an idiotic comment about Revelation, which was not only stupid beyond belief, not only contextually absurd and idiotic, and shows how desperate and dumb you are on a spiritual level, you're completely ignoring every other text we've read. I just listed all of them. Let me do it again. Daniel 7. Oh, that's a vision too. Okay, fine. Matthew 28, Acts 2, Philippians 2, 1 Corinthians 15. I'm going to get to 1 Peter 3 and Ephesians 1. What do you have to say about this, anyone? Craig Little's ridiculous. He will never be allowed on this channel again for making that level of stupidity of comment. I mean, everybody, we could show people one God the Father. They're still going to say one God the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We could show people that it says you put to the test those who say they're apostles. And you found them to be liars, Craig Little. Have you done that? Oh, that's vision for the future, so it doesn't apply, right? Does it apply to the Ephesians? Because it was written to the Ephesians. You don't even know what you're talking about. It's so ridiculous and absurd. I want to make sure you get humiliated publicly for this, because it's people like you who are going to be punished. You're going to get strokes. You knew the will of the master and you didn't do it. You're an evil slave. You're getting strokes. You're all getting strokes if you argue like Craig Little, who not only ignores non-vision texts, right? Can it get more explicit than this, Craig? No, it can't. And you still reject it because you don't believe the Bible. You believe in your false doctrine. Just like the Trinitarians, you don't really care about the Bible. You want people to think you do, but you don't. Because when we read to you what the Bible explicitly teaches, you reject it, you throw up confusion and lies. Absolute, like stupid lies. Like you're so desperate and dumb, you don't know what to do anymore. So you just throw out things to interrupt discussions about serious issues that completely refute your false doctrine and liars in your organization. Someone want to explain to me how this is consistent with the Watchtower's doctrine of all enemies being put beneath his feet? Means he doesn't act as king until that happens? Because not only does it say he rules as king until God does that, meaning just like he says in Revelation 3, Craig Little, he's on his Father's throne and on his throne with authority over nations. Ruler of the kings of the earth. Has nothing to do with the future vision. Hadn't even gotten to that yet. He's talking to John. He's talking to the first century Christians. You're ridiculous. Just like your false teachings and lies. Tell you what, these people, these false teachers, right? This is why, everybody, we have to destroy this doctrine. We have to completely wipe out this false chronology and prophecy. The Watchtower Society is finished. They're done. They've given up on the generation. That's over. Okay, they lied in God's name for numerous decades. They've been lying to people for almost a century about the great crowd. It's not even here yet. They've been lying to all of you, preventing you from being the very Christians you are called to be. But you'd rather believe the lie, wouldn't you, than what the text explicitly teaches. Just like the Trinitarians. One God the Father. Oh, Trinity. He must rule as king until God puts all his enemies under his feet. Nope. He rules as king after his enemies are put under his feet. Okay. Well, it says the last enemy is death. And that doesn't get eliminated until the end. Next, the end. When he hands over the kingdom to his God and Father, when he's brought to nothing, when he has brought to nothing, Craig Little, go subduing in the midst of your enemies. He's on the throne. He has all authority. He's acting as king. says right here. You just don't believe it. You're a false teacher. You're a liar. You prefer false teachers and liars to the Messiah, to the explicit words of these texts, and I have no patience for you. You are a liar, and you're lying to people and damaging them by having them go after all these other liars when it's so clear and obvious you'd have to either be deceived or dumb or completely dishonest. And where it concerns Craig Little, I'm not sure which it is. But the comment he made is so inappropriate and stupid, it deserves to be completely humiliated and exposed. It's ridiculous. It's a deep thing of Satan that we're going to uproot and destroy. Your doctrine has been destroyed, Craig Little. Watchtower witnesses, your doctrine is destroyed. We didn't need to get into King's List. We didn't need to get into chronology. We don't care about your ridiculous interpretation of Daniel 4 7 times. It contradicts the Bible. Your belief that Jesus became king in 1914 is contradicted by the Bible. You do not believe the Bible. You believe the Watchtower. You completely trust them. You have to, right? If you don't, well, then you're not in favor with them anyway. So you're really not in favor with anyone. You're just doing what you want to do and hoping it all works out. That's not how Christians are. We conquer. We stand strong and we get the things we know to be true done. We don't lie to people. We don't tell people there's this larger fulfillment that has nothing to do with what's explicitly said. We don't come up with interpretations that are self-serving and that contradict everything that is said. You do. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should be embarrassed and humiliated for supporting these liars, for going out there and telling people that the generation that saw 1914 wouldn't pass away according to God's promise. No, it was according to your promise, your lies, a promise you can't keep. You know why? Because you can't redeem anyone. Do not put your trust in nobles to whom no salvation belongs, nor in the Son of Earthling Man. You Watchtower people violate that text too. It's like one text after another. Absolutely incredible. Nothing about your understanding of sitting at God's right hand until his enemies are placed as a stool for his feet supports your understanding. It's contradicted. It shows you're wrong, Watchtower people. You're explicitly in error. You're lying to people in God's name. Does that bother you? Does it bother you that you're lying? That you're openly lying to support a bunch of false teachers who are doing the very things the Bible says not to do? Proclaim the end is near? Don't go after them. You do it anyway. Because you're a coward and you're afraid to stand up for the truth. You have nothing to do with the biblical God or Messiah. This is explicit, everybody. There's no getting around this. Is there? Well, how? He must rule as king until. Let's just take a look at that in the Greek, shall we? Is there any confusion? Are we somehow should be confused about this? No, we shouldn't. It's very clear, except to people like Craig Little and other Watchtower supporters who can't figure out explicit teachings of the text, just like Trinitarians can't. You're no better than them, Watchtower people. You're just as bad. You're all doing the exact same thing, favoring your interpretation over what the text says. Where are we doing that? One God the Father, Son of God, sent forth Savior, golden rule. I didn't make any of those up. None of them are interpretations. They're just teachings, 1 Corinthians 15:25. Degar altan basiluain akriu the pantas tus ecrus hypatus podas autu. For it is imperative he reigns until, acri, until, up until, there's no starting. This is already happening. Basi luane is a present active infinitive. This is happening. He must rule as king until, acri, God puts all his enemies under his feet. You got it all wrong, Watchtower. You blew it. You blew it all over the place on this stuff, right? You guys are like the worst interpreters of prophecy and chronology because you were never supposed to be doing it to this extent in the first place. But some of the stuff you guys have come up is so far off. And you demand everybody follow and believe it, or you consider them a heretic. You know who the heretics are. You know who the apostates are. All of you Watchtower supporters have apostatized from the truth. You're not the truth. You're the liars. From now on, we need to start referring to the Watchtower organization as the liars. They're nowhere near the truth on these issues. Yeah, you got some things correct. The obvious things, right? In the name of God, thousands of times in the Bible. One God the Father, explicit. Great. So, that does not make you special. All of these false interpretations make you unspecial. The fact that you couldn't even figure out that he's ruling as king while God is putting his enemies under his feet and while he is doing the same thing, go subduing in the midst of your enemies. They're both doing it. You guys misinterpreted the Bible for your own selfish gain. Maybe originally Russell or someone, different people in the organization, they thought, yeah, this kind of looks right. But at some point, did you never read 1 Corinthians 15:25? Did you never read Revelation 1:5? Did you never read Revelation 2:26 through 28 or Revelation 3:21? I specifically chose those verses, Craig Little, because they're not in the future. They're not in the time that is outside the first century. That was the whole point. But you're so stupid and loyal to your false doctrine, you can't figure it out. It's all future to you. None of it happened. Firstborn from the dead, future. Yeah. No, you're just ridiculous and you love the lie more than you believe the truth. That's why you're with the liars. And we're on the side of the truth. Everybody, this is it. This right here makes it clear he's ruling as king the whole time. And all the way through the end of the millennium, God is going to be putting enemies beneath his feet. Watchtower completely collapsed on this issue and the understanding of Psalm 110:1. Even though it's all right here, right? It's even quoting part of the psalm and referring to it. Very explicit, in addition to everything else we read. 1 Peter 3:21. We're not done yet. Oh, no. But we're close. 1 Peter 3:21. I'll tell you, this is very upsetting. When I see false teachers and liars like Craig Little come in while we're reading 1 Corinthians 15:25, and after we read several texts from Revelation that explicitly speak about what's happening in the first century or already happened, Craig Little collapses and tries to say it's all in the future. With respect, that's all future. Oh, you're reading 1 Corinthians 15:25? Let's go back to Revelation because I can put all that in the future. Well, no, you can't. It just makes you look stupid and dumb and desperate. We'll refer to you as SDD from now on, Craig. Stupid, dumb, and desperate. Only a person like that, like is described in Proverbs, and like Paul talks about with regard to people who were false teachers and liars in the first century, you would have to be a complete moron to write what you wrote. And it's so offensive to me and intolerable that you would make such a horrific interpretation public. It shows you're not fit for any of this. You really should just not even be here. You should be with those you claim you trust. But you really just can't handle all of us, can you? All this truth, all this explicit doctrine stacked up against your interpretations with no foundation in the text at all. You just make it up. Just invent things. Oh, 7 times you're going to pass over Nebuchadnezzar until he understands who's ruling. That's 2,520 years from the last Judean king to 1914. What? It doesn't say anything about that or talk about that in any way, even when it gets to the point where the Son of Man is given authority. It's all consistent with everything we read. And even in that account, it refers to 3.5 times Craig Little and Watchtower people. And yet in Revelation, those 3.5 times were 3.5 years. There was no day for a year. So why are you not applying a day for a year? Or if you do in Daniel 7, it's just stupid, right? Because it's clearly parallel to Revelation 11, where it specifically, it not only says a time, times, and half a time, but it gives the number of days. In 2 ways it talks about what it's talking about. And so Daniel 7 refers to 3.5 times, and Daniel 4 refers to 7 times. And there's nothing in either chapter of Daniel that talks about a day for a year, and the parallel account involving Daniel 7 and Revelation 11 clearly doesn't involve a day for a year. You got nothing. It's just a belief you made up, and you're forcing people to believe in association with a false teaching about this generation, which even you don't believe anymore. That's how ridiculous you guys are. It's over. Get out of there now, or your humiliation is just going to get worse. I know it's tough. You did it to yourselves. So what? So you have to deal with a little persecution and family rejection or whatever. Are you a Christian or are you a baby? Are you here to stand up and be persecuted to death, or do you want a lollipop and a diaper? It's time to grow up. It's time for you to mature. It's time to stop following the Watchtower. They are liars and false teachers. I don't care what true things they teach. I acknowledge that. That does not change anything. It wouldn't change it if I were talking to the Jews in Jesus' day. I'd tell them the same thing. Yeah, you got the right God. Yeah, you got the Bible. You got the temple. You're false teachers and liars. You're making things up that are in the text. You're rejecting what's true. Next. Very simple. You just have to really want to do it. And a lot of you Watchtower people don't want to do it. Yet you judge everybody else who wants to do it, condemning yourself. According to Jesus in Matthew chapter 7, 1 Peter 3, 21 through 22. That which corresponds to this is now also saving you, namely baptism. Not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the request made to God for a clean conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Look at that right there. Baptism, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the request made to God for a good conscience. That's saving us. Faith through Jesus. Not trusting the Watchtower. He is at God's right hand, for he went his way to heaven. Pay attention, Watchtower and Craig Little type people. He went his way to heaven. And angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. Philippians 2, Acts 2, both specify him being resurrected and raised to the right hand of God and given all authority. Right here in Peter, he's again at God's right hand, and while he's at God's right hand, he has authority over angels, authorities, and powers. Just like 1 Corinthians 15, 25 teaches he's ruling as king all the way through the end of the 1,000-year reign. Just like Revelation 1:5, 2:26 through 28, and 3:21 in non-future or figurative context. Incredible the lengths people will go to defend their ridiculous doctrine, huh? In the face of truth, it shows they don't believe the Bible, that they are really evil people. Now, they can change, but if you are this evil to where you will make that horrific of a defense of false doctrine, get out of here. It says right here, he went his way to heaven, and angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. Were made, Craig Little. Past. Do you understand that? Is this future? Is this the Lord's day? No, it says he at God's right hand because he went his way to heaven, and all these things were subjected to him. Just like we read in all the other texts that say the same thing. We didn't even get to Matthew 28. Where it says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So if he has all authority, he's king. He says he's ruling as king. He's the ruler of the kings of the earth. He's on the Father's throne. He has authority over nations. You are wrong, Watchtower people. And you better get out of there fast because they're not going to let this go. They have an overlapping generation insanity they're going to use to pull you down all the way to the end. Now, we're going to end with one last reading, and it's where we left off in Revelation. Remember, we were reading, and we went back to Daniel, and then we brought ourselves to here, and now everything is clear. Look again at this text. Read it. Let me hear it. I'll read it and let you hear it. Sorry, my mouth's getting a little dry. Craig Little with his insanity and absurdity, and just, when I see that level of resistance to the truth, when I see someone so beholden to the lie that they will just totally destroy a clear understanding of the text that doesn't have anything to do with what they're talking about, it just shows they're dishonest people. They are not interested in the truth. They're interested in their own false doctrine and lies. That's it. And that should not surprise anyone. That's been happening since the times of the Jews, times of the Christians. We're told openly that people are lying in Revelation 2 in the congregation, and we have to test them. Jesus approves it. Watchtower won't let you do that. Immediately disqualified. Look at this text again. He's at God's right hand. He went his way to heaven, and angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. Back to Revelation 11, where we left off. Which was where we were talking about how Jehovah took his great power and began ruling as king. After the wild beast was destroyed, the kingdom of the world became the kingdom of Christ, because there's no longer a wild beast, there's no longer the authority of Satan, there's no longer the other rulers of the kings of the earth. He's been ruling as king while his enemies are being put beneath his feet. That's why it calls him the ruler of the kings of the earth, just like it calls him the firstborn from the dead. Already happened, Craig Little. Try to return to sanity or just get out of here and never return again. We don't want people like you here. You're ridiculous. Now, if you repent, right? You can repent, Craig Little. You can publicly apologize for your stupid, ignorant, and blasphemous interpretation of Revelation 1, 2, and 3. Because that's what it is. So we left off right around here. Right? So it says, and remember, we're talking about right after the wild beast. Right? Because this is after the wild beast kills them. Their corpses are on the earth. Spirit of life from God enters into them. They go up into the heavens. 1 Thessalonians 4. Great earthquake kills. And then it says, the kingdom of the world became the kingdom of the Lord and of his Christ. And so at this point is when I believed the authority of his Christ took place with respect to the other authorities being allowed to exist. They're still subject to him, but they're existing and now being removed at Armageddon. And that's why it says the nations became wrathful, your own wrath came, and the appointed time for the dead to be judged, to give their reward to your slaves, the prophets, and to the holy ones, and to those fearing your name, small and the great, to bring the ruin, those ruining the earth. And the temple sanctuary of God that is in heaven was opened, and the ark of the covenant was seen in the temple. And there occurred lightnings and voices and thunder and an earthquake and great hail. And now he says a great sign was seen in heaven. A woman arrayed with the sun, and the moon was beneath her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. And she was pregnant, and she cries out in her pains and in her agony to give birth. This is clearly not a continuation of this, because after referring to him bringing to ruin those ruining the earth and going after the nations and the dead being judged, giving us the reward, right? It's the resurrection, just like we've been talking about with regard to all this stuff. Then we get another vision, another sign that leads to Satan being thrown out and woe for the earth, right? And then the wild beast. So it's not continuing forward, because at this point, at the end of chapter 11, the nations have already been brought to ruin and the dead have already been judged and their rewards given. So it's not, Satan doesn't get thrown down to the earth after the dead are judged and the reward is given to his slaves, the prophets. So it's clearly a new vision. And it says, a woman was arrayed with the sun, a sign in heaven. She was pregnant. She cries out in her pains and her agony to give birth. And another sign was seen in heaven. And look, a fiery colored dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns upon its heads, and upon its heads 7 diadems. And its tail drags 1/3 of the stars, and it hurled them down to the earth. And the dragon kept standing before the woman who was about to give birth, right? So the dragon is in heaven at this point. He's hurled down to the earth the stars or demons that fall, that are following him, right? And you can see all throughout history from the flood and following the princes of the nations of Greece, of Persia, all of these stars that the dragon threw down to the earth. But the dragon stayed in heaven for longer. So he drags 1/3 of the stars to heaven. He hurled the stars down to the earth, and the dragon kept standing before the woman who was about to give birth, that when she did give birth, it might devour her child. And I believe this is, of course, the time at which the Messiah was born on the earth, that the devil still maintained a position in heaven where he could interfere not only in heaven but also on earth with what was taking place, right? Because he's not been thrown out of heaven yet, and he's standing before the woman. The sign of the woman is seen in heaven. And I guess you could argue that maybe the woman in this case, right, even though it's pretty heavenly right here, the resulting effect on the earth, right, the heavenly woman gives birth to the Messiah on the earth. The fiery colored dragon is trying to stop it, right? Might devour her child, right? Kill the Messiah in a way that would make him not suitable for the ransom. And it says she gave birth to a son, a male, who is to shepherd all the nations with an iron rod. And her child was caught away to God and to his throne. Well, what else? What have we been reading about that was caught away to God and to his throne? Messiah. He's the child. Obviously, he's not caught away. The child is representative here. Hey, Craig Little, we're actually in visionary stuff here. Totally different from the first 3 chapters. You might want to read it for once. And if you have, read it again. Right? So she gives birth to a male who's to shepherd all the nations. The child was caught away to God and to his throne. Resurrection. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days, like 3.5 times. War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels battled with the dragon. Right? Now, what just happened here? The dragon is trying to stop the child who is to shepherd the nations, right? It's clearly Jesus. The child gets caught away to God and to his throne. Right after that, war breaks out in heaven. Now, what did we read in 1 Peter 3:22? Remember that? He is at God's right hand. And in Revelation 3:21, he explicitly states, good night, Betsy. He explicitly states in Revelation 3:21 that he's on God's throne and on his own throne. He's sitting down with his Father, right, at his right hand, on the Father's throne and on his throne. He's ruling as king, just like he says in Revelation 1:5, or it says, just like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:25. And right here, he's at God's right hand, right? Right now, Craig Little and Craig Little type Watchtower people, in the first century, Jesus is at God's right hand. Is that not clear? Is this a vision here? No. He is at God's right hand. On God's throne, with him at his right hand, on his own throne, just like he says. Revelation 3:21. For he went his way to heaven, and angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. Who is Satan, everybody? Satan and his angels. He appears as an angel of light. And even if you don't want to consider him an angel, because he's not really delivering messages, maybe he was, but he's not anymore. He's certainly an authority. He's certainly a power. Right? He's standing before the woman trying to devour the child. And only after the child is caught away to God and to his throne is he thrown out. So right here, Peter says he's at God's right hand. He went to heaven. Angels, authorities, and powers were made subject to him. So Revelation 12 is saying the same thing. The child was caught away to God and to his throne. He is at God's right hand. He went his way to heaven. And angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. What is this? It says right here, he battled with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels battled. Now, isn't that interesting? Whereas before, Michael the archangel would defer to Jehovah, right? May Jehovah rebuke you. Even Jude says he wouldn't, get involved with him in a way that would be abusive. He would defer to Jehovah, right? Because Jesus hadn't been made king then. He was hadn't even been Jesus yet. Trinitarians completely collapse over that, though. But did Jesus attack Satan on earth? Trinitarians believe he was the God-man, right? All authority, no difference. Can't split up the persons, right, James? So, if he was God, and Jesus or Michael deferred to God to deal with Satan, then he could have done whatever he wanted to him. But it's only after the child is caught away to God and to his throne. It's only after, like we just read in 1 Peter 3:21-22, Jesus is at God's right hand, that Michael, then, right? Because he's got the authority now. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Angels, authorities, and powers were made subject to him. Michael is the one who stands up as the Prince of Israel. Right here, he's he's beating up Satan and throwing him out. He's ruling as king and subduing in the midst of his enemies. It happens right after this, just like 1 Peter says. So Satan, if Satan were still allowed to be in heaven and wasn't thrown out until 1914, then how was he made subject to the heavenly Messiah? It doesn't make any sense, because he's not doing anything that he wants him to do. He's constantly going outside of what the Messiah wants to do. And so that's why I believe he was thrown out of heaven. There's no managing him anymore. He's done. He put to death God's Son. God's Son was resurrected. And immediately after that, Satan and his angels are thrown out of heaven. 1 Peter 3:21-22 says all angels, authorities, and powers are made subject to him. That his enemies would be made as a footstool for his feet while he's ruling as king. 1 Corinthians 15:25. Remember what we read earlier in Matthew chapter 5, and which is also stated elsewhere, right? We read in Matthew chapter 5, 34-33, that we're not to swear by God's throne, by heaven because it's God's throne, right? Nor by the earth because it's his footstool. Where does this text say Satan was thrown down to? The earth, which is a footstool. All angels, authorities, and powers were subject. All of his enemies were made a footstool while he's ruling as king. So there's no problem at all with seeing Satan being thrown down to the earth after Jesus was resurrected to God's right hand and throne in the first century. It's consistent with everything we've been reading. In fact, as we read from Daniel earlier, Daniel 7, right? It talked about how that horn, that special king, would harass the holy ones of the Supreme One and then change time and law to kill them. Look at what it goes on to say. And the woman fled into the wilderness, Michael and his angels battled, but the dragon did not prevail. Neither was a place found for them any longer in heaven. So down the dragon was hurled, the original serpent, the one called Devil and Satan, who was misleading the entire inhabited earth. He was hurled down to the earth, and his angels were hurled down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come to pass the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. Because the accuser of our brothers has been hurled down, who accuses them day and night before our God. If Michael wouldn't fight Satan, but instead deferred to God because, he didn't have that level of authority, then why is Michael fighting here when it's Jesus who has the authority? Why wouldn't Michael defer to the Christ? Because he is Michael. He is the prince. He's the great prince who's been there the whole time. And he's fulfilling his role right here because he now has all authority. He had to wait all that time until he proved himself worthy on the earth and was resurrected. And then right after that happened, right after he's caught away to God and to his throne, the authority of his Christ is in effect. Satan and all his angels are thrown down to the earth as a footstool for his feet, and the kingdom of God and the authority of Christ is born. It's all right here, plain as day. He is ruling as king until his enemies are put as a footstool for his feet. 1 Corinthians 15:25. He is the ruler of the kings of the earth, the firstborn from the dead, the faithful witness. Revelation 1:5. He has been given authority over all nations. Revelation 2:26 through 28. He is on God's throne, at his right hand, on his own throne, according to Revelation 3:21. Acts 2, Philippians 2 say he was resurrected to God's right hand and given all authority. Just like it says right here. Caught away to God and to his throne, and the authority of his Christ begins. The kingdom is born. Everything happened in the first century. Jesus at the right hand of God, Jesus ruling as king while his enemies are being put as a footstool for his feet. The devil being one of the angels or authorities or powers that were made subject to him, according to 1 Peter 3:21, 22. And let's continue reading. They conquered him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their witnessing. And they did not love their souls even in the face of death. On this account be glad, you heavens, and you who reside in them. Woe for the earth and for the sea, because the devil has come down to you having great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. Now, when the dragon saw it had been hurled down to the earth, it persecuted the woman that gave birth to the male child. But the two wings of the great eagle were given the woman, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place. There is where she is fed for a time, times, and half a time, away from the face of the serpent. So what does the serpent do? Serpent disgorged water like a river from its mouth after the woman to cause her to be drowned by the river, right? The harassment that we were reading about in Daniel concerning the holy ones of the Supreme One, and where it also involved these 3.5 times, right? Because remember, earlier in Revelation 11, it talked about this same stuff, but in a different regard. It talking about it in terms of the activities of the Christians during this time when they would be prophesying for 1,260 days dressed in sackcloth, in sorrow, right? Because of the persecution that's being done, because of the harassment that they're having to deal with. But they're not allowed to be harmed until the wild beast comes out and kills them, just like in Daniel 7. And then it says they would be dead, exposed, and then resurrected, and then caught away to the clouds, consistent with Daniel 7, 1 Thessalonians 4, and everything else we've read, right? So this is all consistent. None of these 3.5 times in Revelation 11, in Revelation 12, in Daniel 7, none of them involve anything more than 3.5 years, 1,260 days. And yet the Watchtower somehow comes up with this understanding of the 7 times of Daniel 4 as being a day for a year, when nothing in the context of Daniel 4 or Daniel as a whole book or its companion book, Revelation, in any way ever uses a day for a year for these times. And the original application is the only application anywhere hinted at in Daniel 4 that could only be 7 literal times or years. It wouldn't apply to Nebuchadnezzar if you did it 2,520 years, right? So the only thing that even makes sense is 7 years. It's ridiculous what they're doing. Right? So again, all of this is consistent. Two wings of this. So the dragon disgorged the water, right? And the earth came to the woman's help. Earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river that the dragon disgorged from his mouth. The dragon grew wrathful, went off to wage war with the remaining ones of her seed, the holy ones of the Supreme One, who observe the commandments of God and have the work of bearing witness to Jesus. Not the commandments of the Watchtower and not bearing witness to them. They're false teachers and liars, okay? We don't care if they've taught some things that are true. All humans are liars. And if you view anyone, even me, differently, you're stupid. I either show you the proof and the facts or you don't accept it. It's that simple. Everyone is to be considered a liar until they show you the proof. You don't trust anyone, let alone completely. Wow. Last part of what we're going to read. And it, the dragon, stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a wild beast ascending out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, and upon its horn 10 diadems, but upon its head blasphemous names. Now the wild beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like those of a bear, and its mouth was like a lion. And the dragon gave to the beast its power and its throne and great authority. This is exactly what we're reading in Daniel 7, where it talks about the beast being given authority to change time and law. Well, how would it get that? Who has that authority on this earth? Obviously, Jesus has all authority, but Satan has been given authority during this time of judgment to operate in error. And he has authority over a lot of the powers of the earth. And obviously, he can create a power like this wild beast. So he creates this wild beast out of the earth, and he gives it its power and its throne and great authority, which the wild beast then uses to blaspheme God and to attack the holy ones, the supreme one, just like we read in Daniel chapter 7. Let's look at one last text, Ephesians chapter 1. I don't know how anyone could come to a point where you're like a Craig Little, where you're that ridiculous and willing to show how stupid you are. And that's what it is. Believe me, I'm being nice. After all we have shown, after all the information we have presented, for someone to have the nerve to tell me that everything in Revelation is future or a vision, and that we can't even read what Jesus tells John or the congregations as applicable in the first century, is beyond comprehension, right? Immediately stop listening to ridiculous individuals. They're just going to waste your time. They don't care about the facts. Does it sound like the Watchtower cares about the facts? The way they changed the generation? The way they lie about 1914? The way they lie about Jesus being king in the first century? Tell you what, I give them credit where credit is due, and I give anyone credit where credit is due. That doesn't mean anything because we're all liars. You want credit? Conquer. Show yourself faithful to death. If you haven't done that yet, you're a liar. And if you don't show me facts and information, I ain't going to hear it. Did you see how Paul confronted Peter in Galatians? Did it look like he was just going to listen to him because he was an apostle and appointed by Jesus? No. No, we confronted him and condemned him to his face. You Watchtower people have no courage. You can only condemn other people because you want to save face. You lack courage. You lack spiritual strength. And that's why you follow people who lack the same things. Ephesians 1, 19 through 23. And what the surpassing greatness of his power is toward us believers, it is according to the operation of his might, of the mightiness of his strength with which he has operated in the case of the Christ, whom he raised up from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above every government and authority and power and lordship and every name named, not only in this system of things, but also in that to come. He also subjected all things under his feet and made him head over all things to the congregations. It already happened, people. Yes, the last enemy, death. We're still waiting for that one. He rules as king until the last enemy is brought to an end. Everything else has been subject to him. He's already king in the first century. It said that explicitly, the ruler of the kings of the earth. Okay, so he's ruling in the midst of his enemies as king on God's and his throne. All things are under his feet. He also subjected, past tense, Watchtower people. This is over. Your doctrine is done. It's false. And if you keep believing it after this, after these texts, you're Craig Little. You're a joke. You're a coward. You're afraid of the truth. It's staring you right in the face. You see what I'm looking at? It's right there. He also subjected all things under his feet. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. He must rule as king until all enemies have been put under his feet. He's ruling as king while that's happening, Watchtower Craig Little people. It's already been done. I don't see how at this point, right? I get it for a while. We all need time to get through this. It's not easy when we're being confronted with so many things at one time and we're learning about the Bible. And there's no way you're going to see all this stuff right away, right? Maybe a few people who really take it seriously and check things out in ways where, like the Ephesian Christians in Revelation 2, in the first century, Craig Little type people, put to the test those who say they're apostles and found them to be liars. That's exactly what we're doing. The Watchtower Society claims they've been sent by God in Christ. They claim they've been appointed and sent forth as their representatives in the earth. That they're completely trusted. God and Jesus completely trust them, and you and I should too. If you do that, you're stupid. I don't even think those of you who say you should do it, or you wouldn't be here. So why even do it at all? Why pretense? Stop putting on the pretense like Peter. Keep going on and putting on this pretense for other people. You think Paul cares about that? You think I care about that? You think the Messiah cares about that? Why don't you make a stand for the truth? Why don't you tell people, look, Watchtower folks, I really love you all, and I've had a lot of good memories and times here, and you've taught me a lot of important truths. But you're teaching false doctrine. And you've been teaching a lot of false doctrine for a long time that's incompatible with all this other stuff you're teaching is true. It, in fact, makes you more culpable as a blasphemer by associating God and Jesus' name with this ridiculous stuff, by telling people to completely trust you, by telling people that Jesus didn't begin ruling as king until the first century, the 1914, when he began ruling in the first century. You're lying to people. Now, many of you, again, you may not realize this right away. It takes time. This may be the first time you're hearing all this stuff. It's a lot to process. Maybe it just blew Craig Little's mind and he completely collapsed and he just went Trinity on us, right? The Watchtower's version of the Trinity. Oh, it's future. It's all figurative. I'm not talking about present things, right? That's the equivalent of the Trinitarian apologetic nuts attempt to use later tradition to interpret biblical terms, right? So they don't care. They're not interested in what it says. If they were interested in what it says, they wouldn't add to one God the Father. If they were interested in what the text says, they wouldn't add to 1 Corinthians 15:25 that says he must rule as king until akri all enemies are put beneath his feet. And that goes all the way until the end of the millennium. But even in another sense, as Ephesians 1:22 says, he also subjected all things to his feet. One more time, last time. He raised him up from the dead and seated him at his right hand, far above every government, authority, and power and lordship named, not only in this system, but also in that to come. In other words, all future and present Watchtower people. He also subjected all things under his feet. and made him head over all things to the congregation, right? We could use other here for like death, but that's the last enemy, right? And there's others in another sense, right? Because the people that follow Satan at the end of 1,000 years, they'll be destroyed, but they're still subject to him. Satan has been put in prison, so he's been thrown out of heaven. That's just another level of his subjection until he's actually destroyed. But it says right here, that's already happened, consistent with 1 Corinthians 15:25, that says he's already ruling as king while that's happening. It's not a future thing, the kingship, that happens after things are subject to him. He's already ruling as king. It's explicit. 1 Corinthians 15:25. Last time. And Watchtower people, this is it. I'm not going to deal with you anymore. I'm going to create a playlist, put everything I've got in there. Maybe I'll do a video or two here and there. If you guys keep teaching false doctrine and telling everybody to completely trust you. But at this point, I don't even care. I think you guys are now a joke. You haven't always been. You did a lot of good work, and then you destroyed yourselves. You literally put an expiration date on your organization. You told everybody that the generation that saw the events of 1914 wouldn't make it. They wouldn't keep living. That Armageddon would come before they all died. You're a liar. You lied in God's name. You need to step down. All of you. It's over. That's an embarrassing organization. Nobody believes you anymore. You've lost all credibility and you can't get it back. You're just getting worse and worse and worse. And you're making Christians look ridiculous. You're putting the divine name through the mud. You're blaspheming. You should just stop everything and shut down. It's a catastrophe. You've built yourself up into this money-making corporation that puts all these material things and false doctrine above God, Jesus, and people. You're not worthy. You're not faithful. You're not discreet. You were not appointed. At best, you're an evil slave beating your fellow slaves because you think the master's delaying when you're the only ones who've been telling everyone he should already be here by now. Nobody else has seen him as delaying. Certainly no one as well known as you. You're the ones doing it. That's why you keep telling everyone to believe all this garbage, all these lies. And you throw things like the divine name and the truth about God and his son as a shield to say, well, no Trinity, divine name. Oh, yeah, great. So did the Jews. They were condemned as a whole nation. Destroyed physically by the Romans in horrific detail. You are not safe. In fact, I'm doing this to try to help you. And I don't care if you believe it or not. But it's over. Your doctrine is false. He must rule as king until God has put all enemies under his feet. And the last one won't even be done until the end of the millennium. It contradicts everything you've been lying to everybody about to support your view of 1914 that then you just use to give yourself authority and self-appoint. But you call yourselves faithful and discreet. So unbelievable and inappropriate. You should be praying to God and asking him to forgive your wretchedness, your terrible sin. Not telling everybody how faithful and discreet you are. You are the exact thing Jesus said is not correct in terms of what you should be saying or thinking about yourself. The two people where he gave that illustration, right? The one who prays, I thank you I'm not like the rest. I thank you I don't do this. I don't do that. And the other one, staying far off, couldn't even raise his eyes to heaven. Well, which one are you, Watchtower people? Not by calling yourselves faithful and discreet and saying God and Jesus completely trust you. Does that sound like the one who can't even raise his eyes to heaven? No, it sounds like the arrogant one who was condemned for doing the very things you're told not to do. So I wanted to have this discussion. Of course, it's very important. I keep getting Watchtower people who are collapsing every day, tell me these ridiculous things and comments, and they're not going to stop, everybody. There's too much invested. Do you think the Trinitarians are going to stop just because you show them one God the Father? Maybe a couple. Do most of them? It just doesn't even faze them, right? It's like, what? Yeah, one God the Father and one God the Son, one God the Holy Spirit. Oh, no, that's not what it says. So, no matter how clear you may agree with me today's presentation has been, in terms of the explicit biblical evidence showing God's kingdom was born in the first century, with Jesus ruling as king until his enemies are put beneath his feet, which continues all the way through the millennium until death is put beneath his feet. None of it is consistent with how you are understanding Psalm 110:1, the period of time when Jesus was resurrected to God's right hand and following. It's all contradicted by explicit biblical texts. And none of what you teach about this stuff has any explicit biblical evidence. Like we read about the times, 3.5 times of Daniel 7 or Revelation 11 or Revelation 12 being 1,260 days. You don't have anything in Daniel 4 that in any way gets you to 1914. And even if you did, which you can't, but let's just say somehow, I mean, it's hypothetical, so it's going to sound stupid, but I'm going to grant that somehow you could show from the Bible that the 2,520 years is true. It still wouldn't prove that God's kingdom was born in 1914. Because everything in the Bible explicitly tells us God's kingdom was born in the first century. And Christ began ruling as king in the first century and continues to rule as king and will continue to rule as king until all enemies are put beneath his feet, with the last enemy, death, coming at the end of 1,000 years, after which time the Son will subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him, so that God can be all things to everyone.